Started yesterday and talked about LBJ's Great Society and what the philosophies were of that Great Society. He wanted to keep the nation's economy growing strong, which meant that it was strong at the time. He also wanted to open opportunities tomorrow for all Americans that only a few enjoyed today. And he also wanted to improve the quality of life for all, not just a chosen few. So he is going to be very much for the common man, okay, so to speak. Now, here are some very important laws that were passed during the Great Society, once Lyndon Johnson got his own presidency. My mother was quite in love with this first one, and that was the Medicare Bill of 1965. The Medicare Bill of 1965. And this particular bill, the Medicare Bill of 1965, provided the following three things to people in America. The following three things. You've probably all heard of Medicare, haven't you? Okay, I'm getting close. The first thing that the Medicare Bill of 1965 provided was that all citizens age 65 and older would receive low-cost hospital insurance. All citizens aged 65 or older would receive low-cost hospital insurance. Anyway, I remember when I first started teaching, I thought, God, I'll never get there. And now I'm 5 years away. Now, what is low-cost hospital insurance? What is hospital insurance? When you go to the right. Right, if you go to the hospital, you get charged different. The hospital charges you, the doctor charges you, the x-ray people charge you. Well, hospital insurance is insurance that pays for bills that if you were sick, that the hospital would bill to you. And low-cost hospital insurance means that your premium would be low for people 65 or older rather than high premiums so they could actually afford, to go to the hospital. Yeah.
Why is it that way for people 65 and older?
Because they are more often ill or sick. That's the only benefit of being. There was no benefit for the elderly medically prior to this law. And Johnson felt that people, once they got to be 65 or over, and most people are retired by then, they don't have jobs. That's a great question because you have teachers that hang on teaching sometimes, not just here but everywhere. Not because they want to be teaching, but because they have to do it for the insurance, okay? And so, if you don't have insurance, that's why a lot of teachers work till they're 65, or a lot of people in general, because then you are eligible for Medicare, in which you can buy low-cost insurance to take you the rest of your life. Because unfortunately, I wasted a lot of money on paying insurance premiums till I got to be about 60. Then you just have more aches and pains and you go to the doctor more. Does that make sense? And so, health insurance is a big deal in this country. You hear about it all the time because when do you need health insurance the most? When you're older. When are you not working? When you're older. When do you have less money? When you're older. And then Lyndon Johnson believed that was important. So the first part of the Medicare Bill of 1965 was all citizens aged 65 and over would receive low-cost hospital insurance. So you could afford to buy insurance in case you got to the hospital. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Okay, the second part of the Medicare Bill of 1965 is that all citizens aged 65 and older received low-cost medical insurance. And what's the difference between medical insurance and hospital insurance? Is your medical insurance is what the doctor's going to charge you out of hospital. Anything that happens outside the hospital is medical expenses. So if I go to Dr. Thurston because I've got a sore throat, that is a medical insurance issue. If I go to the hospital because I'm not feeling well, and I got to go there for a couple of days and they got to pump me full of IVs, and I get charged by the hospital, that insurance pays for that. Okay, does that make sense? And what it did again was helping older people that were retired be able to afford insurance. The third part was kind of interesting in the Medicare Bill of 1965. It provided for all citizens below the age of 65 to receive medical aid through federal grants that were given to individual states. So the third part of the Medicare bill of 1965 gave all citizens below the age of 65 medical aid through federal grants given to all individual states. Now when they gave that money, those federal grants to Wyoming, Wyoming could do then as they pleased to try to serve people that were in need of hospital or medical care under the age of 65. So if you were 35 years old and had cancer, God forbid, and the bills were high, that your state could put together programs through their legislature that this is what we're going to do to help people that can't afford hospital or medical care under the age of 65. But each state was given federal money, and they could decide however they wanted how they were going to set up their programs. Now let me tell you why this is so beneficial to elderly people. My mother and father, unfortunately, got cancer late in their years and both died from cancer. I will bet, and they had a Medicare policy that paid 80-20. In other words, when they got a bill for $1,000, Medicare paid $800, they paid $200. Well, my folks also bought supplemental insurance that covered the 20% that they had to pay. Does that make sense? And you have to pay premiums monthly. And I'm not exaggerating. I bet you my parents, in their cancer treatment, I bet they were charged $2 or $3 million during that time because of my mom lasted 10 years. That's a long time. So even if they paid 80% of, $3 million, that's a big chunk for the person to still absorb, and that's why my parents had the supplemental insurance. And I'm not kidding you. Now this is a terrible thing to say, but I just say this every time. I don't believe we'll ever find a cure for cancer. I don't believe anybody wants to really do that because of the money that's made in that research. I'm sad to say that, but I think of Jesus, we got cell phones that you can text somebody in London, but we can't find a cure for cancer. I struggle with that. Are we really trying? And maybe we are. I don't know. But it just seems like in 2019, with all the technology we have and everything else we've cured over the history of this country, why can't we get that done? It worries me. There was actually a movie out many years ago about that this guy found a cure for cancer, and they were going to assassinate him because of all the benefits and money made. Can you imagine if we found a cure for cancer, what would happen to all these medical people? Well, yeah. So I'm not saying, I'm just giving you a sad scenario. I hope we certainly do, because it's a horrible disease, and I watched both my parents die. My dad especially, a horrible death, horrible. So I hope they do find, a cure, but it really worries me. But that just gives you an example of what one couple in America faced, probably $3 million worth of medical bills. And they were only able to survive because of the Medicare Act of 1965 that was passed by Lyndon Johnson. True story. So it was a good thing. And I will go back to teachers like myself. We hang in there, and I enjoy teaching, so I might go to a 90, but I don't know. But a lot of people hang in there to 65 because they got to get on Medicare. You know what I mean? So they can afford to have insurance. You know what? My wife and I pay a month for insurance. What would you guess we pay a month for insurance? What? I wish. About $1,200 a month. That's what it costs. It's horribly expensive to have health insurance. Luckily, the school district chips in about 90 or about 85% of it. They pay 85%. My wife and I pay 15% out of our check. But if we both retire, who's going to pay that? I'm going to have to. And so nobody can afford to pay $1,200 a month when you're retired for insurance. So you hang in there and hang in there until you get to Medicare age of 65, and then you go on their plan. That's how it works.
Why did they choose the age of 65?
I think that was what they thought people would retire. Most people don't. You have to. I never thought I'd ever be talking about retirement. Geez, my wife never sat down last night thinking, what are we going to do when we retire? I never thought I'd ever be talking. But anyway, Social Security, like you pay into Social Security, keep paying. Because when I get old enough, I'll get that. Hopefully there's some for you when you get left. But when you turn 62, you can start drawing partial Social Security. Most people wait till 65 because then you can draw full Social Security. Now, not being arrogant, but if I work till I'm 65, I'll make more money retired than I'll make teaching. because of my retirements and that types of thing. But 65 is chosen because that's kind of when everybody thought when they made the rules that most people would retire. I think of poor Buell Frazier. Well, Buell still works. He's 75 years old because he hasn't had a great life. He can't retire. He doesn't have teachers retirement like I do. He doesn't put money in 403Bs like I do and you know, get all those investments. He's a working man and he continues to have to work. And he's getting older, and what's happening to his health? Yeah.
How much do you think your room is worth?
Well, I have it insured for $50,000. I don't know if that's enough. Anyway, Medicare bill of 1965 was an important bill passed by the Johnson administration. The second one we talked about briefly yesterday, the Highway Beautification Act, and that legislation obviously was initiated by Lady Bird Johnson. She talked her husband, Lyndon Johnson, into passing the Highway Beautification Act because she thought our highways needed to be cleaned up. They were kind of a mess in 1965, and she thought that we'll start this program, the Highway Beautification Act. We'll get organizations and groups to clean up highways and clean up America. That was her baby, and that's what she dedicated her life to, along with the Wildflower organization after her husband's death and her later life. Highway Beautification Act.
Kind of like the Apopka.
Exactly. That's exactly where it's coming from. Yep. Another important act passed during the Johnson administration was the Housing and Urban Development Act. Anybody know what that is? Housing, you ever heard of HUD housing, H-U-D housing? We have it right here in Moreland. HUD housing. Okay, the Housing and Urban Development Act. And what that did initially, and it's metamorphosized into more, is it paid for the construction of 250,000 low-rent, low-income housing units so that people that did not have a place to live could afford to live somewhere. Okay? So again, the Housing and Urban Development Act called for the construction of 250,000 low-rent, low-income housing units. How do you think they based your rent? How much you paid for rent in HUD housing? How much you made? They have it right here in town. They have it in my hometown. So if you want to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in a HUD housing complex, they'll look at your gross income and they'll base your rent on a percentage of that. So Julie may pay more than Joe, and Joe may pay less than Emily, you know what I mean? But you have to qualify. In other words, your income has to be below a certain amount to get in there. Okay? Now, that further, after this, metamorphosized into people could buy houses on HUD loans, which were really low interest loans. And the benefit to those is they were assumable, which means if Caitlin buys a $100,000 house on a HUD loan at 2%, because she can afford that, if she has to sell her home, no matter what my income is, I could come in and give her X amount of dollars and take over her loan at 2%. And it was a nice selling point for people that had to sell their housing. You've heard of HUD housing, that's what it is. If you drive over by, what's this street over here? Yeah, that area there, those big apartment complexes are HUD housing. If you look at the side, it'll say right on it, Housing and Urban Development Project. And they went way back to 65. Okay, one more act that was passed during the Lyndon Johnson administration was the Immigration Act. And we're having a little trouble with this right now, by the way. A little trouble with this right now because Lyndon Johnson passed a law that abolished the quota system for immigration into this country. The Lyndon Johnson administration passed a law that abolished the quota system of allowing immigrants into the United States. What does that mean if they abolish the quota system? What's a quota system? Yeah, I'm only going to let 20 kids come into AP US History 2 next year. That's my quota. That's my limit. That's the highest I'm going to go. Okay? Well, they had a system basically that limited the number of immigrants that could come in. Lyndon Johnson passed the Immigration Act, which got rid of that quota system. So basically, whoever wanted to come in could come in. Does that make sense? And that's led to some issues. That's a democratic problem, frankly. And that's led to some issues that we have today about, it's great. I think it's great if people come in, if they come in legally and aren't criminals and all that. And that's President Trump's big stand right now is we gotta get this border wall and you know, let the ones in that we want in and not let the ones in we don't and whatever. That's where we're at right now. Well, yeah, big time. Yeah, his quota system's gonna be the wall. He's gonna put a big quota up there, okay? But anyway, no, he is. That's what he's doing, and I don't know if it's all bad or all good. The point being is that it started in 65 and 66 during the Johnson administration, in which we got rid of that and people came in freely. And now this administration believes it's out of control and is trying to put a stop. Now, who's fighting it? Who's fighting President Trump on this? The Democrats, right? Well, they invented this in 65. So, okay, perfect. All right, now again, we're going to go a little bit more of the shortened version of AP US history so we can get farther. So we're going to move on to civil rights during President Johnson's Great Society, but we won't go into near the detail that we could. I could spend 4 weeks on civil rights in the 1960s under President Johnson. We'll hit the highlights, and I think you'll get a good thought process of where we're at, okay? Now, this is one thing Johnson inherited that was going to be a major issue, right? We gave you some conflicts and some not so positive stories about civil rights during the Kennedy administration, right? The Freedom Riders and all that. Well, it isn't going to end, and President Kennedy didn't live long enough to fix the problem. And so this is going to be a major, major, major issue in the United States during the Johnson administration. And most of these issues, if you remember, concern the violence against the American Negro. Every time they turned around, they were beaten or shot with fire hoses or cattle prods or whatever. So this did not go away with the Kennedy assassination. It continued and actually became worse. Now, the first violence that occurred during the Johnson administration occurred in Mississippi. Okay, the first violence that occurred during the Johnson administration happened in Mississippi. And what happened is the civil rights people were trying to register blacks to vote. And this was in 1964. So again, the first civil rights violence that occurs during the Lyndon Johnson administration happens in 1964 when civil rights workers are trying to register blacks to vote in the state of Mississippi. Now this was really sad. About 50% of the population of Mississippi in 1964 were Negroes. Only 5% were registered to vote. Only 5% of those 50% of the population registered to vote. That's pretty sad. So again, in Mississippi in 1964, about 50% of the state's population was made up of Negroes. And of those Negroes in the state of Mississippi, only 5% had registered to vote. Now I want you to give me 3 reasons why they wouldn't register to vote. What? Well, give me an example of that. If they went to register to vote, what might they face? Well, a beating. They might face a beating. Even went as far as that if you went to register to vote as a black, they might burn your house up. They might just burn your house down if you went registered. I'm not making this up, it's crazy. And a lot of black churches in Mississippi were burnt and damaged because of the congregation going and registering to vote. So no wonder only 5% of the population registered to vote, because their chances were if they went to register they'd be beaten, or their houses would be burned, or their churches would be either burned or damaged. And these civil rights workers didn't think that was right. And so they made a major effort to try to go to Mississippi and talk these Negroes into registering to vote. Well, during this crusade, 3 of the civil rights workers go missing. Somebody basically kidnaps 3 of these civil rights workers who go to Mississippi and try to register blacks to vote. 3 of them go missing. And they're eventually found dead, buried in an earthened dam in the area in which they were found missing. So 3 civil rights workers were actually kidnapped, went missing, and they eventually found them dead, buried in an earthen dam. What's an earthen dam? Dam made out of dirt. Yeah, they just buried them, dead. Killed them and buried them. Well, during their funeral, guess who gave the eulogy for the 3 murdered civil rights workers? Martin Luther King Jr. Very good. So during the funeral of these 3 murdered civil rights workers, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave their eulogy. Well, in January of 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. turned the attention of the civil rights movement to the state of Alabama. Okay? In January of 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. turned the attention of the civil rights movement to the state of Alabama. Now, the reason they went to Alabama is because they had a low voter registration as well. And old Dr. King started putting severe pressure on President Johnson to pass some laws that would guarantee the Negro the right to vote. Okay, he's telling Johnson, listen man, this is out of control. We have to guarantee some rights for black people in this country to be able to vote. And so he decided to make his point, that he being Martin Luther King Jr., in the state of Alabama. And so he announced that his intention was to go to Alabama and register 3 million black voters. Not only in Alabama, but throughout the South. Okay? So Martin Luther King Jr. is tired of this. He's upset about the murders that took place of civil rights workers in Mississippi. He focuses on the state of Alabama. He puts tremendous pressure on President Johnson to pass some laws that would guarantee the right of the Negro to vote. And he makes a crusade that he's going to go into the Deep South and he's going to try to register 3 million black voters. His first target is Selma, Alabama. So his first plan